It's mellow, it's raucous, it's tender, it's raw, it's the Maestro fuzz tone.
Hey guys, I'm Chris Bach and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week we're taking a look at arguably one of the most instantly recognisable riffs and guitar sounds ever committed to tape, and that is of course Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. Now, interestingly enough, this track has a rather bizarre story behind it, in that the guitar track you hear on Satisfaction was never actually intended to be on the record. Bizarrely, this was a dub part, as Keef put it, i.e. a kind of rough or a demo part that Keef put down to indicate what he intended to follow later on, i.e. a brass section. Now, funnily enough, Otis Redding's version of the track that was released a few years after was much more akin to what Keef had in mind, according to the man himself. However, after Keith laid the initial part down, the Stones at the time being notoriously busy and in some respects working 365 days out of a year, the next time Keith heard this track, far be it ever having had a chance to sign it off or kind of give his say-so, was actually on the radio. Obviously, the rest is history and it sort of worked out for the best, arguably, in the long run. But it's a fairly interesting point that this was never actually meant to be. Now, the focus of today's video is going to be to try to run you through Keith's signal chain from top to bottom to the best of my ability. Now, needless to say, this is 55-year-old information. Some of this may have been lost in interpretation. It's like Chinese whispers. Anything in regard to gear evolves over time, unfortunately, but I've really delved through a numerous amount of books and interviews and online sources to try and get to the bottom of the gear that was actually used. Now, of course, the first point in the chain of any interesting or unique guitar sound is going to be the guitar itself. And as much as there are three possibilities in regard to what this guitar might have actually been, the most likely that I've been able to narrow it down to is Keith's 59 Burst. Now, there were three guitars knocking around in the studio at the time of this recording, namely the Les Paul, his Epiphone Casino, which he'd been using a hell of a lot in the time running up to this session, and the sort of outside contender being a Gibson Firebird 6 that actually belongs to Brian Jones. However, as I've said, the most likely contender being a 59 Burst. I've read numerous references to this guitar being used on this track. Couple that with the fact that then there is also a rather damning photo of Keith on the day this track was recorded, not necessarily recording this track, but on the day it was recorded using his 59 Burst. Obviously fairly identifiable for having a Bigsby on it. Of course, being a famous guitar in its own right, having been passed on to Clapton at one point and then having a relatively checkered history and it having been stolen at one point as well. But as I said, numerous references to this guitar being involved not only in this session but on this track. So as much as the Casino may well be the contender, arguably it's going to be the Les Paul that is going to get closest to achieving this sound. So obviously not having a 59 Burst to hand, unfortunately this week I've chosen my Patrick James Eggle Macon, a Les Paul in essence, with PAF clone pickups in there to try and get as close as possible to this sound. Next up, and arguably the most important link in the chain in regard to really nailing this unique guitar sound, is going to be the pedal that was used, and that is of course the Gibson Maestro Fuzz. Now, I've read several references in regard to how this pedal actually came into possession of the band, the first being the engineer on the session, sending Ian Stewart, arguably the sixth member of the Stones, around to a very close music shop to the studio to pick up something that was going to get closer to the sound that Keith had in his head for this dub guitar track. Arguably more likely is another reference I've read to Gibson sending out numerous promotional items to the band. Obviously Keith was fairly famously using his Burst at this point, and I've read references to them being sent the pedal as well as a Titan 5 amplifier. Make of that what you will. I know which seems more likely, and it just happened to be the Maestro Fuzz that ended up on this track. Now, much like the 59 Burst, unfortunately I don't have access to a Gibson Maestro Fuzz, so the pedal I've used to approximate this sound is going to be my Way Huge Swollen Pickle. Arguably one of the most versatile sounding fuzz pedals I've ever used. Should say at this point I have no affiliation with Way Huge, this is not a sponsored video, but as I said, it is an incredibly versatile sounding fuzz pedal that when it came to nailing the sound on this track I knew was going to be my best bet. The last link in the chain is of course going to be the amplifier that Keef used, and again, to the best of my ability, I've managed to narrow this down to a Fender Dual Showman. I've read another reference to a Vox AC30, again a brand of amplifier and a model of amplifier that Keef was using with that burst around that time. However, I've read numerous references to the Dual Showman. It really seems to be the consensus that that was the amp that was used on this session. Now, in regard to replicating that tone, I'm using Guitar Rig as usual, and I've dialed in a clean Fender sound, which I've then hit fairly hard actually with the Swollen Pickle to try and replicate the sound of the Gibson Maestro Fuzz, obviously all being driven by my Patrick James Eggle with, as I said, PAF style pickups in it. So it's a relatively similar signal chain, which I hope ultimately gets me at least in the ballpark of trying to replicate this sound. Now, last but not least, it wouldn't be one of these videos unless we compared and contrasted my recording with the original recording. Unfortunately, I can't access the original master tracks for this, so the guitar, obviously on the original recording, is mixed in initially with the bass and then with the full band. So it's not really a kind of true comparison, I guess, in that respect. So you might have to use your imagination very slightly. So, there you have it. As ever, a massive thank you for watching. Please do subscribe and hit the bell icon if you haven't already. I'm Chris Buck, this has been Friday Fretworks. A massive thank you for watching. Stick around for another video next week. Cheers guys, take care, and I shall see you soon.